Changes that we are now facing at this point of the eviction crisis. We have a distinguished panel here today, but first just a moment about Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada. We're a nonprofit organization. We provide free legal assistance to individuals who cannot afford an attorney in civil matters. So if you're accused of a crime, you're assigned an attorney by the public defender's office. Legal aid exists through philanthropy to assist those facing family court issues. We represent children in dependency court, children who are abused and neglected, the elderly and people with disabilities in guardianship court. And one group that we have spent a great deal of time assisting over the past 3 years have been tenants facing evictions. So we have endeavored throughout the COVID crisis and now to bring you up-to-date information as you struggle to assist so many tenants in need of legal help and changing resources. So to begin the presentation today, I am going to turn it over to John Norman. John is the Advocacy, Outreach, and Policy Director for Nevada legal aid entities in the state of Nevada. John.
Good morning. Thank you, Barbara. I'm not going to mention COVID-19 too many times, but I think when we're talking about the eviction crisis, that's where we have to start. Our state saw unprecedented unemployment during that period, and as we emerged and the economy reopened after COVID-19, we saw rents rising 20-30%. Many tenants faced multiple rent increases within 1 year. During COVID-19, CHAP, the CARES Housing Assistance Program, kept many Nevadans in their homes. So Clark County was able to get $375 million out the door into landlords' pockets and kept almost 70,000 households in their homes. And when I think of 70,000, that seems like a big number, but when you think about that's households, right? That's not individual people. So that's 250,000 people who were kept housed because of the county's work. Well, that funding is changing, and the eligibility criteria is severely going to be restricted to target our most vulnerable in our community. I think Tim will be talking about that in just a few minutes. And I think the main point is the crisis isn't over, right? The U.S. Census Bureau Pulse Survey estimates 31,000 Nevadans are behind on their rent currently, with 30,000 households believing they will be evicted within the next 2 months. Statewide, an individual needs to make $23.70 to afford a two-bedroom apartment, a typical two-bedroom apartment. That's working 40 hours a week for 52 weeks. I was reading a news article by Michael Lyle from the Nevada Current from this past year that cited that 7 out of the 10 most common professions in southern Nevada do not earn enough to afford a studio apartment in our community. And when we think, we can look to states back east for what happens when large-scale rental assistance programs change and the funding is restricted. In Minnesota, their program ended mid-year 2022. And now, the latest news article from Minneapolis says there's a dramatic uptick in the number of people sleeping outside. And I believe that's what we'll be facing in our community as this program moves to help people with disabilities, people on fixed incomes, and the vast majority of people in southern Nevada won't fit into those guidelines. And so I think the important part is to think, everybody has this idea that the eviction crisis is winding down, and I think from the perspective of legal aid providers, it is going to be at its most dire in the coming months, and that's kind of, you know, where I believe the community is going to be at. Thank you.
John mentioned the CHAP program, the rental assistance program. To discuss a little bit about that record investment that was made and what CHAP will look like going forward, we have Tim Birch, who is the head director of Clark County Social Services. You have another title? Okay. He'll tell you his other title.
All right, good morning. Tim Birch, Administrator of Human Services for Clark County, Nevada. Fancy title means I'm responsible for the Department of Social Service and our indigent support services as well as child welfare. As was mentioned, this last 3 years has been a situation that we've not seen in our community. You know, we made it past post 9/11 when there was a slowdown in business. We made it through the last economic recession due to the housing crisis, and we saw dire consequences lasting around rent and housing for about 6 to 9 months post recovery on those items. We expect this recovery to be a much longer road because it was a much deeper cut very quickly. But I need to start off by giving recognition and thanks to our federal delegation as well as our state and our local Clark County Board of County Commissioners for making sure that the pass-through dollars that came down to Nevada got to Clark County and got into the hands of social service. In the initial rounds, Clark County passed almost all of those CARES assistance, that first CARE Act dollars, right into rental assistance. And because of that, we stood up the CHAP program. We did not know that the Omnibus Funding Act or the ERA 1 and 2 were coming, but they did, and because of that, we were able to keep that funding stream available. And what the rental assistance became known as CHAP. We just didn't ever rebrand it because the community stuck with that. So CHAP is really now the Clark County Housing Assistance Program. And that portal, I want to make this clear to anyone who's listening who needs help. If you've applied for help or you don't know where to go, it is chap.clarkcountynv.gov. The application portal is staying the same. The address is the same. The rules and requirements are changing a little bit. That's because if you've paid attention to the news, I listened last week to an NPR report that said all the Intermountain West states, you know, Arizona, Utah, Idaho, they're all winding their programs down or had by the end of the calendar year. Our Board of County Commissioners saw fit to make sure that there were monies still available to our community to assist those most in need. So they directed us to stand up a program to impact seniors and those on fixed income, and that's what we're referring to fixed income CHAP. You hear that nomenclature. As well as we have eviction diversion CHAP. So there are two funding streams behind this, and we don't want folks to have to worry about what do I qualify for, or what product do I ask for. Just go to the portal and apply for assistance, and the rules engine and the chat bot will help you figure out how to do that. We have a support desk. If you can call for assistance, all the information is right there on the portal, and our staff will process you for the product that fits your need. So the needs that we're looking for, we know that there are two things that vault people into homelessness most frequently. That's a major change in circumstance, a major life event, typically associated with a health event. They're incapacitated in the hospital for a long period of time. They come out and they haven't been able to pay their rent, and their apartment or housing situation has changed while they've been gone. So we have for that our eviction diversion program. The requirements there is that you make 80% of the area median income, and you heard earlier, if you've got a household, a single earner household with children, you're most likely going to qualify, and we'll get that chart out for everybody to know what those look like. But the key is you have to have an eviction notice. The previous rental assistance programs, if you were just behind on rent and thought you might not be able to make it, you could go ahead and apply. The programs now all both require the fact that you have an eviction notice in order to qualify for those. Again, we're trying to create these interventions right at the point of the most need to help people stay housed. We also know that one of the fastest growing populations of homelessness across the country are people over the age of 50. So we are looking at individuals who are senior citizens or living on fixed income. Fixed income. Doesn't mean that you've been earning the same thing at your job for the last 5 years and haven't gotten a raise. Fixed income means that you're living on a disability check from the federal government, like SSDI, or a Social Security check. So your income is fixed in that space. What we saw during the early pandemic and since is that individuals in this community who are senior citizens who have been living in the same apartment 7, 10, 12 years, paying their rent on time, 20, 30% increases around them over that time period, they can just no longer afford to pay their rent through no fault of their own. So this program, instead of where the eviction diversion is about getting people whole and averting that eviction, this is about also averting that eviction, but letting us work with that household for up to a year to try to navigate them into more affordable housing so they can maintain that independence and stability. In this instance, housing is health care, and we know that people do better when they're at home in their own environment. So we want to make sure that we are able to navigate our most vulnerable folks into those stable living situations. With that being said, again, I know the numbers were mentioned earlier, that well over $380 million, over 70,000 households, but that's the work that's been done. We are now focused diligently on the work that's ahead of us, and we know that there are tens of thousands of households in this community that need affordable housing. So I just want to just give a reminder to folks that the Board of County Commissioners set up our Welcome Home program, and we thank you, former Governor Sisolak and his team for again getting the Welcome Home Nevada, the funding into our community to build more affordable housing. Our Board of County Commissioners recently put out $120 million to over and above our typical federal HUD allowance to build more units in this community so that we have places to navigate our rent-restricted individuals into. So highly appreciative. We couldn't do any of this work with all of our partners in the room, from Legal Aid, I see U.S. Vets, I see ADSD from the state, I see a lot of our partners that we work with every day to help serve our community. So I want to thank you for being here and listening, and I'll turn it back over to Barbara, and I'll be available for any questions.
Thank you, Tim. Next to speak is Aaron McDonald. Aaron is an attorney. He is the lead attorney of the Housing Justice Program at Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada, and he's going to list the top things you need to know and to advise tenants of during this eviction crisis. Aaron.
Thank you, Barbara. So as Barbara said, my name is Aaron McDonald. I'm the lead attorney of the Housing Justice Program here at Legal Aid Center, Southern Nevada. Listen, I want to be upfront with y'all. There are no legal protections for some of the things that we'd like to see. There are no legal protections against high rent prices. There's no legal protections for pricey application fees. There's no legal protections for a lack of available housing in the market. Jonathan Norman here is going to discuss some of the proposed legislation we have in the upcoming session to address some of these things. But unfortunately, right now in Nevada, we don't have protections against these things. So what I'd like to talk to you about today are the things that a tenant does have legal protections from. So you heard from Tim, the CHAP program is changing. We're no longer going to have the vast pool of funds available for rental assistance. The Las Vegas Raft program also is no longer accepting applications. And those are the two primary rental assistance agencies that tenants were relying on during the pandemic. Now there is hope out there. HopeLink of Southern Nevada does accept rental assistance applications for low-income members of North Las Vegas and for Henderson. So if you have a tenant who resides in North Las Vegas or in Henderson, we're encouraging you to reach out to HopeLink and apply for rental assistance. If you do that, you could also raise the Assembly Bill 486 defense, which was enacted during an emergency session. What that does is it says that if the tenant has a pending rental assistance application, then the judge is obligated to stay or stop that eviction case from progressing, as long as the tenant takes steps to file an answer in response to an eviction notice to defend themselves. So again, if you have a tenant behind on rent in North Las Vegas or Henderson, encourage them to reach out to HopeLink and apply for rental assistance. I'd also like to talk about changes to the eviction as an institution as well. So we did enact eviction mediation during the pandemic. Unfortunately, that program has sunset as of December 31st, 2022, so there will be no more eviction mediation. There is a new program that Tim briefly mentioned. It's called an eviction diversion program. And so that program is going to be available to residents of Las Vegas Justice Court. We've already updated the tenant answer, which you can file online as well. And so if our tenants take the steps to file that tenant answer online or in person, the court is going to review the tenant for availability for eviction diversion. What that diversion program is going to do is it's going to divert folks who are on a fixed income, those folks who are on disabilities, who are on Social Security, who received a rent increase over the last year and then they received an eviction notice. And so all the tenants need to do is they need to file an answer in order to be enrolled in this eviction diversion program. Now, one of the other instrumental parts of this program is legal services. Legal Aid Center has a housing justice program with 10 attorneys and staff members, and we're committed to providing legal representation to every person, every tenant, every family that gets diverted through the eviction diversion program. So Clark County Social Services will be present. They'll be screening folks for their new CHAP eviction program. We'll have mediators through the Neighborhood Justice Association who will be analyzing the case and seeing if they can mediate a resolution. But then Legal Aid Center will also be providing a staff member to screen the case for eviction legal defenses. And so this is really important because a lot of times tenants have legal defenses where if they were to go to court and they were to assert those defenses, they could prevent the eviction. For example, let's say a tenant has a habitability issue. Let's say that their water hasn't been working. They've contacted their landlord and taken the appropriate steps to put the landlord on notice, but the landlord doesn't fix the issue. So the tenant pays out of pocket to fix the plumbing. They pay $1,000 and fix the plumbing in their apartment even though the landlord was obligated to fix that issue. Well, under the law, they're allowed to withhold their rent. Well, let's say the landlord isn't happy that the tenant withhold their rent, and the landlord simply serves an eviction notice. Well, that's a legal defense called retaliation, and that's something that legal aid can screen for, and we can keep that tenant housed. And also with that bears with it $2,500 in statutory damages if the landlord violates the law and moves to evict the tenant when the tenant addressed habitability issues. Now, for our community partners, the most important thing that you can tell to tenants that come to you in need is that they have to file a tenant answer in response to any eviction notice. So that's the only way you're going to get diverted to eviction diversion. That's the only way that you can raise these defenses with the court. Nevada is unique throughout the country in that we're the only state where the tenant is obligated to file with the court first. And so when the tenant files an answer in response to an eviction notice, the landlord hasn't yet filed a complaint. The tenant's the very first party that files their legal defenses and files a court proceeding. And so for our eviction notices, it's so important, and I can't remind you enough that you need to absolutely remind your tenant to go down to the Civil Law Self-Help Center, which is located within the Regional Justice Center at 200 Lewis Avenue, or go online because you can file your tenant answer online for Las Vegas Justice Court, and file that, and it's typically required to be done within 7 days of receipt of that eviction notice. If the tenant doesn't file the answer within 7 days for a non-payment eviction notice, about a week later they'll get a 24-hour lockout notice posted on their house where the constable will tell them that they'll come back the next day and forcibly remove the tenant and evict them. So long as the tenant files the answer, it's going to get set for a diversion program if they qualify. It's going to allow an opportunity to have a hearing, and those are typically being set about a month and a half to 2 months out. So it gives the tenant an opportunity to address the issue and buys them some more time so they can fix the issues. So again, electronic tenant answering filing is available in Las Vegas Justice Court. It is not available in North Las Vegas or Henderson, and so if you have folks that live in North Las Vegas or Henderson, they're going to have to get the forms online or go to the Civil Law Self-Help Center and then go file in person at the Justice Court within Henderson or North Las Vegas. And again, if you need legal help, the most important resource I can refer you to is our Civil Law Self-Help Center. Again, that's at the Regional Justice Center on the first floor, which is 200 Lewis Avenue. They're open Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And they can also go online and get all the forms and resources for free, and that website's www.civillawselfhelpcenter.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. I'd next like to ask John Norman to come back to talk a little bit about what legislation would help stabilize the community as it relates to evictions.
Thank you, Barbara. Aaron and Tim both mentioned diversion court. Diversion court works because of the AB 486 defense, which was passed last session. That defense allows for a tenant who's filed an answer and has a pending rental assistance application for them not to be evicted while that application's being adjudicated, right? Because rental assistance that comes after you're evicted doesn't help anyone, right? So that legislation sunsets on June 5th of this year. And it's critical to allowing programs like diversion court, which really what we're talking about is allowing our county social services to get upstream of the case, to interface with that tenant before we're in the 24-hour rapid rehousing lockout period. So I think legislators need to be thinking about how to continue that defense to allow for eviction diversion and rental assistance to make a difference when it can make a difference. Next, I think Aaron mentioned Nevada being unique in our summary eviction procedure. It is the only jurisdiction and the only type of action I am aware of where a tenant, the person responding to a lawsuit, is the first person who files a paper with the court, right? When I came to Nevada, I practiced in New Mexico, and I was told that that was the procedure. And I looked the attorney who practiced in that area in the eye, and I said, that can't be right. And then I read the law, and it is right. So switching it to have a more normalized eviction procedure where a landlord files a complaint, a tenant is served, and the landlord or the tenant has a period of time to respond. That's another opportunity for social services to have a little bit of time to make a difference for families. And finally, some basic tenant protections. You heard a little bit about fees, that there's no protection from application fees. So, you know, I was at a Nevadans for the Common Good event where one of their members was speaking about paying application fees, and he was out hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and he still did not have an apartment. I think there was a report during, I think it was last year, where a CCSD teacher was living in her car, and she had shelled out like $700-800 for application fees and had not found a place to live. So I think addressing those where fees are connected to actual costs, and you only take one application fee for one unit and you process it, it should not be a way for an unscrupulous landlord to generate an additional source of income, right? And so I think those are the key changes. And then in addition, you know, a no-cause eviction, a tenant can have just 30 days to find a new place to live. So, and then if you have a disability or you're elderly, you can get an additional 30 days. I would be hard-pressed to find a place, move all my stuff within 30 days, and I have means and resources. So we believe that that timeline should be shifted to 60 days and an additional 30 days on top of that if you have a disability or you're elderly. So those are the things that are our legislative agenda for this coming session. And if you're a community partner, we need you to be engaged during that fight. Thank you.
So, in summary, we thought that when jobs began coming back after COVID, that the eviction crisis would ease. But we didn't anticipate the unparalleled rent increases that we're facing, in large part due to out-of-state corporate takeover of our housing stock. And so our eviction crisis is in a new phase and is not ending. So the top, as you heard from our distinguished panel, the top takeaways from today is that rental assistance is changing. The $375 million that we received from the feds was life-changing. And we want to thank all the nonprofits in this room who worked with tenants to make sure they were aware of it and to connect them to it. And I'd also like to thank Clark County, which was recognized as one of the top jurisdictions in the nation in distributing this rental assistance. But it's changing. It's more limited. That if you do believe you apply, you should still go to the CHAP portal. And that is for North Las Vegas and Henderson residents too. Anyone that lives in Clark County, because Clark County rental assistance is still available to anyone that lives in Clark County. And then there may be community partners that still have rental assistance, like HopeLink, like those funded by our United Way. They have smaller amounts, but tenants should be aware of that. The other takeaway is look out for eviction diversion. Community partners, Legal Aid Center, Clark County, other nonprofits, we are working so hard on having this be a permanent resource for our community. And I want to recognize the Las Vegas Justice Court, who applied for a National Center for State Court grant for this eviction diversion program, and was awarded the largest grant in the nation to begin this effort. We can't just go from CHAP to nothing. And helping our seniors, people with disabilities, people who work every day and their car breaks down and they got to get their car fixed so they can keep their job and are 1 month behind in rent, this program is there for them. And legal services. As Aaron said, and as you can see at the back of the room, we want to highlight, we have new flyers explaining the rental assistance program. We have new flyers. We have an eviction sealing clinic. If you have an eviction on your record and you can't get a new place, you can seal your old eviction under some circumstances, which can help you find an apartment. We have those resources there, and information about the Civil Law Self-Help Center. If any of our community partners want to go visit, the Civil Law Self-Help Center is located in the Regional Justice Center, 200 Lewis. Bo Anderson is the directing attorney over at the Civil Law Self-Help Center. They help 300 people a day facing eviction. 300 people a day. If you don't think if you run into someone who doesn't think there's an eviction crisis, send them there. It's an amazing operation. And then staff of legal aid are over there to advise tenants and to sign them up for legal help. So those are the main takeaways, and we're happy to answer any questions. And to the press, all the panel members are available for one-on-ones as well. But any questions from the community, our community partners? Yes?
So is there any resources for like our Northern Nevada clients?
Yes. So the question is, what resources are available for Northern Nevada? There are 2 legal aid programs in Northern Nevada. One is Washoe Legal Services, and the other is Nevada Legal Services, which is a statewide program. And John would be happy to get you individual contacts for those offices to help any of your clients in those areas. The eviction law, of course, is the same. So if any of your clients get that 7-day notice, they will have to file that answer in the Reno Justice Court or the Sparks Justice Court. So some of this statewide information is absolutely the same, and that probably is the most critical takeaway. Yes?
Just for clarification, if we have a client that comes to us, context income Social Security, we would then send them through the CHAP program, but if it's something broader than that, we would then recommend them to the eviction diversion program?
So yes, Tim, would you like to clarify? Yeah, why don't you take the mic?
Yes, the question, in case you didn't hear it, was if there was a client on fixed income, should you send them to the CHAP portal? Yes. If there is a client who is making under 80% of AMI, which I think is about a household of 4, about 50,000 in our community right now, who is facing eviction, where do you send them? To the CHAP portal as well. So all applications go through the CHAP portal for emergency rental assistance through Clark County, and the guidelines that they need the questions they answer will help guide their application so that we get it to the right worker on our side. We don't expect the individual or the program in the community to know which program to choose. That's what the portal is there for. Everything starts with the portal. Yes, sir. Good speaking point. I should have started with that. Thank you.
And just to further clarify, on the eviction diversion program in the Las Vegas Justice Court, the court will be screening who goes in based on questions that have been added to the answer. But regardless of whether your client is selected or not, if they are on fixed income or they have an unanticipated emergency, and again, we have a flyer that spells it out pretty clearly here, temporary change in circumstance, they should be applying to the portal. Yes?
This is for John. Do you have the BDRs for the BDR numbers for the legislation that you're talking about? So we know what to track.
Yeah, John, why don't you take the mic?
I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but we do have BDRs in for each of those, and I can get those to you. And, you know, we've spoken with leadership both in the Senate and the Assembly, and I think all our legislators understand that housing is the crisis facing our community. You know, it doesn't matter if we're talking about our Children's Attorneys Project, you know, programs in Northern Nevada Legal Aid. Housing cuts across all those programs, because if you have kinship caregivers that are struggling with housing, right, then the housing crisis is a foster care crisis. And so, you know, I think in talking with leadership that they understand that housing is what we're facing, and we do have BDRs on the items that I highlighted in our legislative agenda.
If you want to email John, his email is jnorman, common spelling of Norman, at lacsn.org. But we welcome your involvement following those BDRs, speaking about this to your legislators. You know, sometimes the middle class, upper class, forget what it's really like for people struggling on the streets. You as nonprofits know the struggle, so we appreciate you letting them know that this is on your mind. Other questions? Yes?
Just a clarifying question. Someone mentioned that for one of the CHAP requirements will be to have an eviction notice, but then you do also know that an eviction, a summary eviction specifically, can be between 5 to 7 business days. So I'm wondering, like, what do we do with folks that might have missed that window? Because it is a very, very small window, especially if folks are like already struggling to make ends meet, maybe are dealing with like an emergency, have kids.
Yeah.
What is the solution?
So the question is concerning the eviction notice, and I believe that you must be served with an eviction notice for both the fixed income CHAP and the temporary change in circumstance CHAP. Eviction CHAP, right? Is that what it's called? No. So as soon as they receive that 7-day notice, this isn't the order, this is the notice. As soon as they receive that notice, that's sufficient. Correct, Tim? Yes.
So to expand
follow your response.
What happens if they miss it? Because we do have a lot of folks that are like, this is day 5 and I'm supposed to be here 2 days.
Right. The question is people that wait, right? They receive that 7-day notice, but they don't take action till day 6, day 7. Maybe they don't think it's real. Again, getting back to the statutory change, people in other states who move here, they don't believe it's real. Or they may just have trouble finding someone to give them advice. They should still, no matter what, file an answer to that eviction, whether it's day 6 or the last day, and file with the portal that day. That should be enough for them to say, I have a pending application to delay the eviction. It's recommended they take action right away, but if they do delay, they can still get things done, especially if you're there to help electronically that last day.
I have a question in regards to the Union community.
Yes.
Do they have the same rights
Yes, the question was for the immigrant community, do they have the same rights and the same assistance? Yes. They are entitled to apply for rental assistance. They are entitled to file an answer to any eviction notice they receive and to be heard by our courts. They certainly can get legal help as well, regardless of their status. Yes.
I can't remember the exact number. Was it 486 or what? The one that's sunsetting in June?
Yes, that was AB 486 from last session.
Is there action being taken in this session to prevent that from being sunsetted?
John?
I could have just shouted yes. So that is one of our BDRs. And then I would also mention, I didn't mention this, but one thing that makes summary evictions so pernicious in my mind is how many people self-evict, right? If you go on Eviction Lab or you want eviction data for Nevada, you can't get accurate data, right? Because, if you receive a notice and you self-evict, where is that recorded? There's nothing filed with the court. There's no way for us to know even how many people are facing eviction every month. So I think that's, one of those wrinkles in summary eviction that makes it really hard to collect data to fight against that, is we don't know how many people are evicted every month in Nevada. Okay, thank you.
One of the things that we didn't mention much was the lack of affordable housing. I think Tim mentioned the county has made this a priority. The state has made it a priority. One of the other things we want to do is encourage our lawmakers to do all they can to cut the red tape. As we see our nonprofits receiving this money, we need the units up as soon as possible. But even if everyone is built, we still have a shortage, of tens of thousands of units. I'm not sure what the latest figure was. Is it 90,000, 80,000? 80,000. We are short 80,000 affordable housing units that are needed for people on fixed incomes in this community. It's a staggering number. Yes?
So unfortunately, the seniors and disabled to whom this funding is directed, but it's basic funding is directed, so many of them are going to have technological issues and will have mobility issues. Is there anything in the legislation that may facilitate that for them?
Yeah, so the question was seniors and people with disabilities with technological issues. I think that in the legislation, there's two things. One is extending the no-cause eviction time that will allow them to get connected to social services. And the other is really we have to do that, right, as nonprofits. The Civil Law Self-Help Center, when it has all of its answers able to be done online for the Las Vegas Justice Court, that's 72% of all the evictions are done by that one court. But for Henderson, for North Las Vegas, and for those seniors who can't figure out the online resources, we're going to have to do that for them. The Civil Law Self-Help Center will help anyone file an answer that walks in. Anyone. If we see a senior, if you see a senior or a person with disability who cannot navigate the process themselves, you can communicate with Aaron, and we will help. We will help them directly. That is one of the reasons for today's press call. We have aging in the state of Nevada Aging and Disability Services here. We need to spread that word, and we need to provide that service. Yes?
I wonder if you could just restate that perspective you were talking about, because we see millions of dollars being poured into the city, new projects, billionaires trying to put stuff, but yet we're having this housing crisis. I wonder if you can just sort of clarify for people who may not get it that this is an actual problem.
Yeah. So, not everyone in every community can afford the average cost of rent. And those people include disabled veterans, our seniors, people with disabilities. As John mentioned, unless you're earning a certain hourly amount, you can be a minimum wage worker and not be able to afford a studio apartment in this community. And with the housing rent increases that have happened this past year, we are in a state of crisis. And people who are working as hard as they can't keep up with the crippling rent increases. We hear it every day. If my landlord raised the rent $50, $100, I could pay. It would be tough. I'd have to make a sacrifice. But I got a rent increase for $700. What do I do? How many nonprofits have heard this? Every day we hear it. And so one of the reasons that the situation is so dire is because of the amounts that rents have been increases, the lack of affordable housing options. We're at an 80,000 deficit, and that is why we fear that with rental assistance changing and being more limited, eviction mediation ending, this crisis is basically entering another stage. Michael.
So this is about the legislation that's being proposed. You mentioned all three bills that you mentioned. There were versions of those bills in 2021. The deposit fees, regulations on application fees. It got out of the Senate, but didn't get a hearing by a Democratic Assemblywoman. The legislation to expand eviction to 36 days was omitted out. Even the eviction summary bill was clearing the test study bill. What indications do you have that those legislation will go farther in the next session?
That's exactly right. Whether it's SB 218 from last session, which was Senator Ratty's bill, which had a lot of the protections around fees, to extending AB 486, which was done in last session, to the summary evictions. I think it's about our community and our leaders understanding where we're at and that we're short 80,000 units, that if you track what's going on back east, and just in discussions with leadership, that they understand that this is a priority. So I am looking forward to putting on good hearings that highlight why these are so important for our community, and pushing for them. And I don't know that housing can be ignored in this session, those bills, because last session we were dealing with the pandemic. We were rolling out AB 486 and those protections to keep people housed, but now this is the normal, is going to be our community needing housing reform, right? So we are post-COVID, and I think it requires solutions that, these aren't far left solutions, right? Normalizing eviction procedure. We're asking for our state to get in line with, Oklahoma, Kansas, and how we deal with evictions and tenants. So I think, we're going to be in that and pushing for good hearings.
One follow-up question.
Yes.
What conversations are you having with Governor Lombardo about that? Because those were introduced under a Democratic governor. We're now under a Republican governor. What conversations are you having with his office about approving that legislation?
So I have not had discussions with Lombardo's office about the legislation. I know that he has said housing is going to be a priority during his administration, and we look forward to having those difficult conversations about what our community and the people in our community need versus special interests. Thank you.
Could you explain
Yeah.
one more time where and how it is that Nevada is unique as you were saying?
How summary eviction came to be?
Yeah,
The history?
Why
Oh, yeah, so why it's unique is in most, I mean, every jurisdiction that I'm aware of, and in every legal proceeding that I'm aware of, the person who is aggrieved, so if I'm a landlord and I haven't gotten rent, you know, it's incumbent upon me to file something with the court to start the legal process, right? Summary evictions, we just flip it on its head, and the tenant has to file an answer without any other pleading being filed. As an attorney, it is just so counterintuitive that would be the way that the process would work. As far as the history of it, I think Liberation in a Generation, their think tank out of D.C., they put out a paper on how we got to have summary eviction in the reverse process. I would have to dig back and find that to answer that question.
But I'm wondering if you could just explain how that would work. If you're my landlord,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I'm about to get evicted, but you haven't given me anything. So how am I supposed to do that? I mean, you would explain how that actually would work.
Yeah, so currently, right, if it's a situation where you're behind on your rent, which is over 90% of evictions, you get a 7-day notice to pay or quit. So you have 3 options at that point, right? You can get current on your rent, you can self-evict, so you can leave the premises and surrender it, right, and that ends the proceeding. Or you can file an answer with the, Las Vegas Justice Court or whatever your jurisdiction is. How it works in most states is the tenant gets a notice, and then after the notice period is exhausted, the landlord files a complaint with the court. So there's a court-stamped document, and that is served upon the tenant, and then the tenant has a period of time, I think in the last jurisdiction I was in, it was 10 days, to file an answer to the eviction, and then it gets set for a hearing. So that's how the process works in other states. New Mexico is where I practiced, and how it works in our state is the reverse. The tenant has to know that they need to file an answer. And so how that works, I think the data for like how many people respond, I think we saw during the pandemic, thanks to a lot of the people in this room, right, the rate of response doubled to people who were filing an answer when they received that notice.
Okay, any other questions? Yes.
Any Nye County resources?
Nye County resources. That's a tough one. So Nevada Legal Services operates in Nye County. Again, the law is the same. Resource?
211.
Yeah, a 211. That's about it. It's tough going out there. With that, thank you all very much for coming, for being involved. We're around for interviews or any follow-up questions. Thanks again for coming. Thank you.